Awesome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our dance and visual art presentation with Rachel. She is one of our amazing dancers here at Broche Ballet and has a lot of history in terms of just being in love with ballet. And so she's been inspired to, with her background as a photographer, an art historian, and a ballet dancer, she wanted to kind of combine this all together to make a little presentation. She has her master's in art history and critical theory from CU Boulder and is also a photographer, loves dogs, loves ballet, just an all around amazing individual. And we're so lucky to have her for this presentation. So keep tuned in. We are definitely open here for questions. I think I either throughout the presentation if you want, Rachel, or afterwards. So you can kind of designate that.
I think it works best if people put their questions in the chat because while I'm screen sharing, I can't see
To you
other
guys.
stuff. So that way I can't see if somebody's raising their hand or anything.
Okay. So great. Yes, use the chat box there. If there are any questions at the end that we get from our YouTube and whatnot, I can dictate those to you. But yes, everyone should be able to see her shared screen right now for the presentation. So welcome. Thank you so much.
All right. We ready to get started?
Yes.
All right. So I believe my screen is up. So welcome, everybody. I'm Rachel. I'm very happy to be here and talking to you guys. I'm very, very happy that Broche was so awesome as a team to invite me to speak to you guys today about the things that I am passionate about. So, dance and the visual arts have long been intertwined in sculpture, painting, performance, and it's really a sort of it's no wonder that with the beautiful movement of a dancer's body through space, as well as the elements of dance that reflect culture and time, dance has been an object of the art world as much as it has been an art and aesthetic element itself. Today, I'm going to share some images with you from the history of the art world and talk about the journey of dance and representation through the modern era. I'll argue that the advent of modernism, including the Industrial Revolution and Age of Reason, brought about changes in the art world that helped elevate the dancer from an object in artwork to the subject of artwork. So, to begin, let's set out some timelines and terms. The Renaissance starts off our early modern period. And this little timeline here kind of shows you a quick overview of very gestural representations of painting in those types of elements. Admittedly, I am leaving out a huge swath of the world. This is primarily focused on the European art, France, England, Russia, Spain, Germany, the Netherlands. Uh, Mostly because that is where we see the engagement with ballet specifically. So we start with the Renaissance and then move into the Baroque period in the 1600s, and Neoclassicism and Rococo in the 1700s, and into the 19th century, the 1800s, we'll see realism and romanticism. And that's the advance of our technological and scientific advances, which I'll talk about later. In art and in this presentation, the object and subject are presented in opposition to each other. An object is seen as content. It's inanimate, it's representational of an idea, such as prayer or community or culture. A subject is topical, directed, and identified. Rather than a reference, it is the thing. A subject is alive and talks about a specific place and time. Because dance itself is both a medium as well as a work of art, it lives in this complicated mid-ground between the two. And I'm using this photo as an example to kind of set up that dichotomy. It's a contemporary photo, helps us underscore this sort of that combination between object and subject in contemporary space, because this isn't actually a photo of a dancer. This is a photo of dance as an idea. This is a photo of the dancer's form being used to accentuate the space that she is in. The title of the image is actually Abandoned Building. The dancer is not named. She's not identified at all. So, as you can see, that kind of makes her an object, and dance itself as an object to mirror the shape and structure of the building that's behind her as a formal image. Another example, the use of the ballerina concept in fashion to convey a sense of high art, rarity, or delicacy, often to very bad effect, as called out by the popular Instagram account Models Doing Ballet, such as right here. As a side note, what I love about this photo is that's actually Edward Watson from the Royal Ballet in London, and he commented on this post and said, sometimes they just pay you to show up. So as a dancer, he knew that this was bad, but he was like, I like a paycheck. So back to art in general, where dance lives in it. We're going to start with the Renaissance. As you can see, these are a couple paintings. Um, I have not identified them here because it's not so much the paintings that matter, but just the subject itself. Dance styles and purposes in the Renaissance were divided into court dances, such as the pavane and the branle, which are shown here. The first one is this is the pavane, and it is basically a partner walking dance around the court gallery. And the branle is right here, which is another sort of weaving in and out dance. You can actually find examples of these on the internet, which is kind of cool because, especially if you're interested in any kind of dance history. Um, Primarily, these court dances were for trained dancers, and the dances were for the purpose of displaying outfits, providing entertainment, and illustrating wealth. Likewise, the paintings of these dances were not showing the dance themselves specifically, but rather the moment around the dance, court intrigue, hierarchy of who's present at the event. You can see with things like somebody looking directly at the camera because they might be more important, somebody turned away from the camera. There's a lot of, I could literally do an entire hour-long lecture on just the directions people look in these paintings. We don't have time for that. But that is it's a luxury setting. It's essentially an entire framework communicating that, hey, we can afford a painter to document all of our painting and dancing. It's really great. Meanwhile, country dances away from the court and away from the high court culture uh, became entertainment as a sort of high to low transition of culture, much in the way that we see high fashion translated into consumer level fashions, and often the inverse when high fashion borrows from street culture. Country dances were a product of the middle class that reflected on their merchant status, with free time that was not possible in their original serfdom, but without the structure and rules of court life. You can see this evidence in this painting, The Dancing Couple by Jan Steen. Country dancing, as well as many other elements of middle class or merchant life, particularly in the Netherlands, began to thrive as we move into the 1600s and we see the rise of genre painting. This golden age of the Netherlands is most famously documented by Vermeer, but he was one of many painters working at the time. Steen is one of his contemporaries and painted works very much in this vein, with people celebrating festive occasions and having fun. These two figures are dancing and playing while kids are playing around as well. There's people eating. This is actually the painter over here being represented as flirting with a lady. And this is a temporal physicality to the human experience. But this does not just mean like, hey, we're also having fun, like in court. This is actually a painting that was known for including sobering motifs. You can see the people grouped here in the background with the dark hats and dark clothing and the church tower. This motif is meant to indicate that while we have fun, there's still a world beyond us that we need to pay attention to and know that we are not always going to be here alive and enjoying life. We have an afterlife that we have to focus on and have this focus on morality. This is also really popular in this sort of content in the Netherlands because they were increasingly supportive of Protestantism at this time. While this painting is considered sort of a genre painting, it also falls into the Baroque style. But true Baroque has a way more dramatic approach. The Catholic revival and Counter Reformation were taking a firm hold in Spain, Italy, and France. And so paintings associated with the Baroque style in those areas were extremely dramatic with high drama of light color, emotional engagement, and articulation of the stories of the Bible or the moment of something happening. Um, this is not a dance image, obviously, but the movement and drama is typical of the Baroque period in this painting of it's one of my favorites, Judith slaying Holofernes by Artemisia Gentileschi, one of the early female Baroque painters. I could do a whole lecture on her as well because I adore her. So the dramatic moment of this biblical story was considered a high art topic. But if you go back and look at like the country dance painting by Steen, that would actually just be considered like a lower cultural artifact or a frippery or a trifle of some sort because it was not meant for it was meant for the like the middle class. It wasn't court painting. It wasn't big and beautiful. These were um, the court dancing paintings were for the higher cultures. The big Baroque story paintings were for higher class and culture. And then you have just the middle class basically buying their magazine forms of dance and like their pictures. You can kind of look at it as uh, genre painting is the Instagram of the 1600s. So paintings like this could also represent ideals, like the Arcadian landscapes frequently seen in the 17th century in Europe and in the late 18th century in America under the concept of manifest destiny, which is that the world is beautiful and present and available for us to take. Art movements don't always have hard and fast lines about which artist is grouped in with what style, whether it is Baroque or Rococo or uh, Renaissance going into realism, any of those things. So while some painters are emblematic of their movements, others, like Claude Lorraine, who painted this landscape with nymph and satyr dancing, this actually is a neoclassical painting. It still includes some of the lushness of the Baroque era, but rather than the high drama of the Baroque painting, like the one by Gentileschi, this one is more restrained, and there's a little bit of a narrative between the nymph and the satyr dancing. It's showing seduction, it's showing a sort of play between the morality of life. Here, it's dance is not being documented. This is not people coming in together and saying, like, look, I was out in the field today and I saw these guys dancing. This is a metaphor of human interaction with the ideal. And the dance that takes place between the human and the ideal concept here is just an object of physical space to further the narrative of the painting, especially as it's surrounded by classical imagery. As you could see in this painting with all this classical imagery, this neoclassical movement was something that hung around for quite some time because it still transitioned into paintings even on a small scale where a family photo essentially existed. This is George Romney, and this is a painting he did 100 years later after that nymph and satyr painting. But again, still using the neoclassical structures, using the structures of early Greek and Roman statuary to represent these dancing children. So again, this is not, hey, these kids were dancing like this. This is essentially, we're trying to tell a story that is using the history that of movement as we know it, and dance is used as a tool to portray these images. You can see the contrapposto, which is this shape of the mother, how it kind of does a three, like her weight has shifted to her hip, her leg is bent, her head curves around. That is a very traditional classical style for representing the body. So by including that, that emphasizes this concept of the neoclassical and the ideal. But that doesn't mean that the country dances were left behind. Oh no. And there we have a little greyhound, just like Julie's, right there in the front. Um, we continue to have in the late 16, early 1700s, these broad court dances and country dances together. This is in the country, but it's using a lot of the imagery of like the Venetian masks and the frivolity of the people who were around at the time. This is fun and flights of fancy, and it is related to less the neoclassical and more to the Rococo style of painting, which is a style that was associated primarily with the French court of Louis XV. It was actually considered in opposition to neoclassical works of the same era. It wasn't actually called Rococo until about 100 years later, when everybody just referred to it as like basically that overdone, super fluffy stuff that no one likes and that it was out of fashion. So images like this and the style of the Rococo era, it produced this sense of overindulgence that led to caricatures of the nobility, such as Marie Antoinette. We all know how well that worked out for her. So you can see why, as we move into the Age of Reason and past Rococo, the idea of this overindulgence, fun, and frippery sort of went out of fashion. While the court was dancing and entertaining in salons, the working class were working and not quite enjoying the same luxuries of the upper class. There was also the rise of the performance and art class. The French Academy of Arts was in full swing in the 1700s, and were establishing stylistic hierarchies in painting and graphic arts. Court dance had evolved to stage performances, with the ballet actually being injected into operatic performances. In 1760, Jean-Georges Noverre penned his Lettres sur la danse et les ballets, helping to establish the visual and structural vocabulary of ballet as a technically perfect and emotionally evocative art form. So this is where we start to see ballet as we understand it. We understand that ballet is an art. It's not just these fun, lighthearted subjects of dance. And so we have, again, lighthearted subjects of dance like this, except, you know, not really everybody is out in the field on their regular old 18th century afternoon. This is actually the first painting of a specific dancer. This is Marie-Anne de Coppée de Camargo. She was known as the first woman to execute the entrechâte cut. She was also allegedly responsible for 2 innovations in ballet. She was the first to wear slippers instead of heeled shoes, although you can see she still has the heels here from the court dancing. And there's no evidence she was the first woman to wear the short skirts and tights. She did help to popularize them. And she is said to have been as strong as the male dancers. By painting her and naming the painting La Camargo, it is actually like a paparazzi kind of image. This doesn't say that this specific painting helped make the transition from dance as object to dance and dancer as subject, but in the 18th century, you have pre-revolution Paris. You have ballet moving from the court to the comedic pantomimes to the Baroque and classical stories of the Paris opera. You have the playground of the aristocracy, not as dancers, but with dancers. And La Camargo was emblematic of this time, and she was the first superstar of French ballet. From there, things began to happen very quickly. We have the first photograph taken in France in 1827. And we cannot underestimate the power of photographs and the history of what was going on at that time. We've got the American Revolution, which everybody has become much more intimate with now that Hamilton's popular. The French Revolution happened in 1789 to 1799. And then coming into 1820, we have the Industrial Revolution. These all included the development of photography, rail transport, mass production of textiles, the work of Beethoven, some steam engines, travel, portable lenses for photographs, the popularization of reducible prints, and just the increasing quality of the photograph. Even though photographs were still slow, like this was a very long exposure. It could still see faster than a painter, and the camera began to democratize imagery. Painters were liberated from representational work. They didn't have to paint a person dancing in a field and telling a story with the entire painting. And that freed them up. And see, we're moving pretty quick here because we're already up to 1876 and Impressionism. This is the art movement that is most solidly associated with dance. In Dance at Les Moulins de la Gaillette, we see again the cultural paintings of the middle class, like in the Dutch genre paintings and the Rococo paintings of fun and indulgence, but without the accompanying moralization. This is just a view into the world. This is a time in France when the flaneur was a social construct, and that is a term that's used to describe the men, such as these guys right here in their skinny jeans and top hats and fedoras, just like now, that wander around and take in the sights and think about things and drink coffee in cafes. This is the Paris of cafes, the lights, can dancing, ballerinas. It's also the Paris of Cézanne, Van Gogh, Henri Toulouse-Lautrec with his graphical designs. It's the Paris of alcohol and poverty, and it's the Paris of Degas. The movement toward these impressionistic styles of light and gesture helped create a romantic era. And the newly created concept of the ballerina as a star on the stage in France was magic. And now, of course, life's perfect. We've got light, we've got dance, we've got art, we've got painting, we got photography. So, of course, everything was perfect for everyone, right? And no one suffered. Wrong, of course. It was into this newly modern world that Degas presented Little Dancer, aged 14. At the 6th Impressionist exhibit in the spring of 1881, Degas presented the only sculpture he would ever exhibit in public. This Little Dancer, age 14, has become one of the most beloved works of art. And most people have either seen this or seen a reproduction of it or seen photos of it and love it. However, when it was first exhibited in 1881, it was not so beloved. The critics protested almost unanimously that the Little Dancer was ugly, but they did have to acknowledge that that she was astonishingly real. And this realism was revolutionary in nature. Rather than the soft, gentle, starlit imagery of the Impressionists, this mixed media sculpture of the Little Dancer was a modern subject. She's a named student at the Paris Opera Ballet. She was the daughter of a Belgian tailor and a laundress. Her working class background was typical of ballerinas at the Paris Opera School. These dancers were known as petits rats de l'opéra, literally opera rats, tiny little scurrying, fast-moving creatures in the background. But the derogatory association of the name with dirt and poverty was also intentional. Young, pretty, and poor, ballet students were potential targets of male protectors, and I say that with the biggest air quotes possible. Degas understood the predicament of the Little Dancer, what the contemporary reviewer Joris Karl Heisman called her terrible reality. So this statue is, rather than impressionistic in nature, is a bit of realism in the world. Not romantic at all. She is poignant, deeply felt, a girl of 14, despite the difficult position in which she has been placed, both physically and psychologically. She still stands with a measure of dignity. Her head is held high. And all of her trials, frustrations, abuses, and traumas become visible. And in this sculpture, dance itself has become a subject. You can see these subtle differences even from, because that was in 1881. This is in 1778, John Singer Sargent, where Capri Girl on a Rooftop is just a dance as object. There's no identity here. But then when you have just 4 years later, El Jaleo by Sargent, this is very specifically dance is the subject, the emotion, the experience, this present physical reality of everyone in this room. Additional paintings that represent this engagement with dance as a concept, even though it doesn't look like a dance painting. Stanislav Gonski in 1898 painted cap sheaves. These are sheaves of wheat wrapped in silk to protect them from the frost. And this scene was described by the painter as a group of dancers that he just had to paint in the light of the evening. And most people would understand that as being the sort of approach to painting and art now. Everybody understands the concept in the current era that art can be representational or art can be metaphorical. And so this is kind of in that setting. We also have paintings like The Dance by Henri Matisse from 1909, where the gesture and movement of the body is the subject. Meanwhile, photography was still had on its game, speeding up its ability to capture the dancer's movement. This 1915 photograph by Arnold Genth of Anna Pavlova in motion during a performance is considered the first performance photo. And what we can see here, rather than a painting or a photo of 100 years prior, this actually shows her in motion. There is no way, like anybody who has taken any dance class knows that you just can't stand there and hold this pose for hours while the painter tries to paint you. So we are understanding that this is a moment in time, and it has an allusion toward the previous moment and what comes immediately after. And it's understood as movement and being arrested temporality. This kind of movement and gesture still inspired the painters of the time. This is the Carnival of the Harlequin by Miro. And you can see even here that same sort of upright gesture and movement from Anna Pavlova's photo is here in the painting, with the arms moving about and the bodies, even though they don't look like human bodies, there's still a very dancerly approach to these physical structures within the painting. And if you want to cut it down to even like the most simplest form, Étude pour danseuse à la palette by Julio Gonzalez from 1934. This is just a study for another piece of work that he did, but this is an excellent example of how dance itself became part of the modernist vocabulary. Essentially, take everything else out, you just have the gesture, and we still recognize it as dance. So therefore, we know it's not speaking about something else. We see it as dance, as movement. And of course, happening at the same time, we have the inimitable Martha Graham being documented, 1937. Live performances, documentation of dance as performance, where it becomes an art form in itself, not just entertainment. Martha Graham's known for creating such evocative works as Chronicle, Deep Song, Celebration. These pieces are very impactful, and we know about them because of the ability of not just photography, but the original film, moving picture recordings able to show images like this. This is an integration of the dancer and the dance as the subject. This kind of sets off like a water slide of imagery and art and movements and performance going into the 60s. but I'm going to jump way ahead and just kind of touch here on how it ends up in our contemporary time. This is Playing Ball in Blue and Orange by Tiffany Chung from 2004. This piece reminds me so much of Martha Graham's work because this artist created herself as a dancer, working with objects in space and expressing her personal strength through movement and documentation. Likewise, we have artists such as Wayne McGregor, who is a choreographer and studio owner in London, who has created the concept of dance as interactive, not created, but been very impactful in the concept of dance as interactive community performance. He works with professional dancers, such as you see here, but McGregor also works with community members, works with computer people to create code and interactive storytelling to engage with the idea of the temporality of dance and performance. Dance is absolutely the subject in this case, but the documentation is also part of it. The dance doesn't exist without the documentation, but the documentation would not exist without the dance. So it's no wonder that dance is a popular topic for visual artists because it's ephemeral, it's enjoyed in memory. For the dancer, it's lived in the moment. But because of our ability to document and understand dance as an art form and dance as the subject of art, the dancer is allowed to live within their performance and also outside of the stage. I love this little bit because it's not even just limited to high art, because we have the Dancers and Dogs project, which is fantastic. It has brought the world of the ballerina to so many people just to be able to see them as people. The dancers are silly, the dogs are definitely silly. And much like everything else in the world, rather than creating an ideal, these are unpredictable, silly, beautiful, funny, emotional, engaging images that allow dance to live beyond just a story for someone to tell. So I'm going to close with this photo of Mikhail Baryshnikov and Jerome Robbins rehearsing, and a quote from Robbins. It says, "Dance is like life. It exists as you're flitting through it, and when it's over, it's done. But I will add that the art lives on." Thank you.
Wonderful. Yay.
I saw Tina clapping. Do we have any questions? I see some things in the chat.
Questions.
All right.
Might take
Awesome.
a few minutes to see how people formulate questions and whatnot. But yes, wonderful. That's so good. I'm so glad that we could share this again. Miss Rachel, actually did this for our studio a few weeks ago already, and oh my gosh, I was blown away. Said we have to do this again, and since the festival came up, we were able to kind of drum up some ideas on how we can fill this festival out in the most amazing ways, and this had to go in it. So we're so
it was a great opportunity to edit it.
there you go. Yes.
Because after I gave it the first time, I was like, oh, I should have done this. And oh, I should have done that. And now like I get to go back and fix it.
There we go.
Unlike a performance.
Exactly. I'm just going to check to see.
Nolina Pink said this was my favorite so far. Thank you. That's so lovely.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Rachel.
Go ahead, Julie.
It's interesting being in dance, but not knowing much about the visual arts. That's never been something that I've learned a ton about. And it always confused me a little bit, honestly. And it was awesome to have such detail brought to some of these things today. I think one thing that I find interesting about art, like paintings, like you were saying with paintings taking so long to create, is that it took me a long time to understand that everything in there is so deliberate. Like they didn't just accidentally paint stuff. Whereas if you're moving around, you might accidentally make a motion and you don't know what's deliberate. So it was
Right.
interesting, even just the point when you were talking about those three sort of nefarious characters in the back, or like darker characters, how deliberately people painted that sort of thing. Um, how did they, like, especially with some of those more festive paintings that sort of made everyone look like they're just so joyous and jumping around and leaping around. What other kinds of things did they kind of put in there that was super deliberate that we should be looking for when we look at this kind of stuff? Like what should we be looking for that's like interesting to kind of try to find in paintings?
One of my favorite things is, this is especially prevalent in the Renaissance, is the presentation of the paintings in a very structural space. You will see a lot of, think the Last Supper. That space is very linear and structured, and there is a hierarchy that is created by all of the players and the gestures that they have pointing toward the center. You can see, like, even with Judas, he's making a gesture that's indicating, hey, we got to watch out for this guy. But even beyond that, there is this concept of the memento mori, which is a reference to death, even when we enjoy life. So if you're at a museum and you see stuff from the 16 and 1700s, you can often find paintings that are two-sided or in cases where on one side it's a beautiful like lady wearing a pearl necklace, and on the other side there is a skull. And the skull is basically saying like, you can enjoy that pearl necklace while you're here, but I can't take it with you. And so all of those sort of moralizing in some ways, but also just reminders of the limitations we have on life were part of paintings. The hierarchies of what were created in the painting schools between working with court painters, much like court dance versus genre painting, also set aside structure and rules. Did that help?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It seems like there's just so much. It's just a whole new world of information to know and learn about, to look for these almost like inside jokes, or like inside little bits that painters were leaving for us in there.
Mhm. And they were leaving them for each other as well, just like that painting by Jan Steen, where he painted himself into it as a flirt. And there is a painting by Velasquez called Las Meninas, which has so many layers that it's just super fun to explain it to someone for the first time as they're looking at it, because you see a little princess in the front and you see the painter looking and you see a shadow in the background in the doorway, but then you see right here a mirror with the king and queen, and you realize, oh, I'm actually sitting as the viewer where the king and queen are sitting, and it's a painting of me versus actually being a painting of the princess, because the princess is just standing there and the painter is looking at the king and queen or the viewer.
Wow, sounds like they're a little mischievous.
I mean, if you had to spend all day in your office painting, wouldn't you try to put in a few jokes?
That's basically what's happening right now.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, no, that was very helpful, Rachel. I think I forget because the paintings look so serious and kind of stuffy. I forget that they might also be doing things, or like putting things in it that aren't so serious, or that have different meanings, or that, maybe are extra serious. Like I forget that they have that other layer going on.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody's asking, do you have any reading suggestions for the history of dance? Yes. It's in the other room. um, tell you what, I can put together a reading list and we can post it on the Facebook page and as a suggested resource. Does that work?
That sounds great.
Yeah, because I have several. I just don't have them in here because this is my working from home office, which is technically my closet. Hi, Tina. So cute.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to kind of think about a lot of the conversations that we have about like beginner dancers and like learning ballet and whatnot, and how much time it actually takes to um, craft our own artistic abilities and performance and whatnot. And these painters are probably doing the same thing in how they're studying their subjects. And so it makes sense that there's so many layers that they're putting into it, because because it takes so much time, they're like crafting it as they're making it and whatnot.
Not only that, they have teams.
Right.
I mean, Michelangelo wasn't in there just like sometimes he was laying on a board painting the ceiling, but he also had an entire studio. There's so many times where you will see, if you follow up any art news, you'll see painting thought to be from Vermeer's studio authenticated as actual Vermeer, because they are able to do x-rays and look and find the sketches that are made underneath and understand the difference between the way a Vermeer student would sketch a hand versus the way Vermeer would sketch a hand. And it's amazing to think about it, because we often put a similar idea on dance identity.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the prima, but the core has a way harder job, because you got to follow. And if you mess up, you get yelled at later. And it's everybody who has ever been in a room with like 3 other dancers knows it is impossible until you get like really focused to follow along.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even amongst us teachers, whenever we get each other's students in our classes, they have their own mark made by their like master artist and teacher as well. Like, oh, you're a Julie student. Oh, you're a Jackie student. So to kind of like see those similarities is really interesting as well.
Well, it's like whenever somebody comes into Chrissy's class and she says, and dab.
Yeah.
You always see people go, what?
What are you doing?
But by the time they've been to 1 or 2 of her classes, they're flossing in the middle of a break. And, and it's like the culture, like, yes, Vico says, I'd say it happens with any artist, right? That's why they recommend of not learning from just one teacher. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the benefits of Broche, because there's so many opportunities to work from different teachers of different levels. And this whole weekend has been an experience like that. Just seeing, I mean, even if I thought I was good, my brain kept falling out of my head during these master classes, because the teachers would be like, all right, you're going to do this, 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 this. All right. And then we're going to turn around and we're going to do this, this, and this. Then you're going to turn back around. And I'm like, wait, are we doing it? Or is this just laying out the combination? And then at a certain point, I was just like,
let's do it.
You can't see my feet. I'm totally doing it.
Exactly. Oh, awesome. Anywhere else? See if there's other questions.
Annie from YouTube learned a lot. Says thanks. Thanks.
Awesome. You're welcome. Thanks for watching.
Yay.
Let us know if you have questions, Annie.
Yes, I have answers. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong, but there'll be answers.
They're up for interpretation, I think, with this sort of thing.
Absolutely. And that was a point that I made during the last time I presented this as well, is like, this is not set in stone. This is my take on this based on the experience I have and the things I've studied. And obviously I have left out so much that it would be impossible. There's still areas of this that you could go in and still get a PhD on one man in a painting, because there's so much work to like dig through and uncover. I just happen to put it together in this way, but it doesn't mean that my way is the absolute final answer.
So how do you gather this information? Is it just study on your own? Has it been from your education? Like what's your where, not to like question you because I
Mhm.
believe you, but like how do you find your sources?
So lots of resources. Um, I started by going and pulling out my book, Apollo's Angels. That's the one I was thinking of. That is like my Bible when it comes to the history of ballet. And then I go in and I start looking at dance magazines. I look at art magazines. I go to the websites for museums. They have a lot of information on their pages. JSTOR is like, if I could just have an unlimited access subscription to JSTOR for the rest of my life, I would be so happy because that was my favorite thing in grad school. I was just pulling articles and like having citations and notes and then essentially putting stuff together, putting my notes down, cross-checking it, making sure I read it right and thought about it right, and I'd go and, like, do some edits, and then go and say, "Well, these 2 slides should be flipped. Not a problem. This slide, even though I really wanna include it, it doesn't support my argument, so it goes." And it's a lot of that because it's formulating a conversation, and yes, it helps that I did go to school for art and I went to school for art history and particularly that my focus started at about 1850 to contemporary. So I really have that sort of like Central European knowledge, um, sort of as just a background.
Awesome. Great. What other takes on dance as object slash subject are there? Like things you may disagree with? That is a question from Annie on YouTube.
Other takes that I might disagree with. I think it would be possible to argue all along that dance is the subject of any of these paintings I used, even in the beginning. Um, I'm looking at 2 paintings on my wall right now, one by John Singer Sargent and one by somebody I don't remember because I didn't write it down. Um, and they're beautiful. And it's like it's possible to say that those are da paintings of dance, and it just happens that there are people in there, but they're really talking about the painting as dance or the dance as painting. Likewise, you could look even at like a calendar up here of a dancer in a photograph, and it would be just as easy to argue that you're using the physical nature of the dancer, the gesture, the expression as just formal representations. So, like like I said, it's not completely 100% black and white. Did that answer? I hope that answered, Annie. Jess, you're muted.
You got it. Thank you.
Vico asks, I know this is a very broad question. What tips would you give to learn to analyze paintings like you did today? For example, noticing the church in the background and what it means and things like that. There are a lot of really introductory references. There's a bunch of these books. They're like very short history of books, and they're like little tiny books that will basically run you through like a very short history of Renaissance painting. They'll say, Renaissance painting was structured. Renaissance painting referred back to these logical stories. It was the moment before. So, for example, Renaissance David is before he throws the rock, whereas Baroque David is as the rock is being thrown. It's You'll learn these like differences in time and be able to compare them to each other. It's also there's so much online that you can just Google it. For me, it's not sometimes I can just look at something and understand it because I've studied so much. But right now, I think with Google Art, there's a really good opportunity to see some people have started creating the Google Art ecosystem The image is there. You can see related images. You can read notes about the images. You can go to the museum's webpage and see some notes on it. Then you can start looking at other related paintings and other things in that exhibit or in that museum or in that specific artist's oeuvre that allows you to kind of compare what he's done or she has done in one painting or the other. That's looking and engaging and reading, I guess, that's the short answer, but there's also no wrong way. If you just like a painting and you just want to learn more about it, you can just find a painting and read about it and learn about it and look at it and enjoy it. And that's totally okay. That you don't have to have that full on like academic background. And sometimes it's more fun when you don't.
Awesome. I totally agree. So it's fun when you can kind of maybe start at that point where you have been at the very beginning of the stages, and as you start to learn about it, it becomes more and more fun and interesting. I mean, that's how it is for ballet too, I think, in terms of like the layers of onion peeling off, like, wait a second, you mean I have to turn out all of the time? Wait, this is the theme throughout the painting for everything? Holy crap, you know? So it just, and then you see the little details that make it so special.
And it's really fun too when you start to learn about those rules is when you can see someone else breaking them. So just like with dance, when everybody was incredibly formalized, and then Martha Graham comes along and she's like,
I'm gonna do this. Totally.
my hand is like this. I mean, everybody's just, but that's what makes it exciting.
For sure.
In similar ways, like when you go from, like the Impressionists were not beloved when they first started painting. Everybody was like, what are these crackheads doing? It was seen as just, that wasn't how painting works. And now it's like incredibly popular in like blockbuster exhibits all over the world. But at the time, it was seen as very basic, to use current terminology.
Interesting.
Do you have an analogy to what would be like that now? I have a hard time relating to like picturing what it would feel like to watch someone in real time breaking the rules. Would that be like do you have a thought on that?
I think it's could sort of be even drawn down to a very specific the concept of how things go viral. When like the Chewbacca mask mom from like 3 or 4 years ago, like moms don't present themselves like that. So the fact that she did, everybody was like, "Oh my god, this is great, share it." Grumpy cat. Cats don't look like that. So when a cat is shown that has like the and so easily can be like made into a repeatable, understandable visual, it breaks a rule and then it becomes so normalized we don't realize that the rule was broken. And it's only when we start to look back in previous time, because think about a time before Facebook.
Yeah, or like TikTok or something.
Yeah.
You're just getting replicated.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I started Instagram in 2013, but it had already been around since 2010 as a photo app that had a sharing component. Now it's a sharing app that has a photo component. And as a photographer, I had friends who, once I finally signed up for Instagram, were like, how did you not have this before now? I was like, I had other apps. Why? But now you can't imagine life without it. Like I'm on Instagram all day, every day, and having multiple conversations in my private messages, plus having conversations back and forth and tagging people and stuff who, and then they tag me and then I tag them again. And there's like inception level conversations happening in the stories. And like, think about it. Even the stories didn't exist 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So any kind of change can be seen as a rule break. And then once it becomes normalized, it's understood as just part of the history.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, that's very cool.
And that touches more on my like cultural theory and critical theory, like stuff like Habermas. He talks about stuff like that. So if you want to go read something really dense in German.
Great.
Any other questions?
I don't see any, but they could be out there in the universe.
Well, I will put together a list of some resources, both on history of dance and history of art, and we can share those on Facebook. So anyone who wants them can have them. They're vetted by me, which take that with a grain of salt and take that with a frappe.
Oh dear.
But I definitely appreciated the opportunity to talk about this because
Yes, this was so wonderful.
this
Thank
is
you
like
very
my
much.
passion that I love.
Well, we can definitely feel that from you, and it is a great experience to be able to, learn a little bit more about what our passion is and how that expands into other art forms as well. So thank you for broadening our perspective in
And
this.
there's so many perspectives you could look at it. You could look at dance as a social element. You could look at dance specifically as just culture and class interaction, and dance as specifically in Russia, but also in France, dance as propaganda
Mhm.
and a tool of the state to communicate nationalist perspectives. And just that kind of like nothing occurs in a vacuum. And so anything you do has something that touches to it from somewhere else.
Yep, for sure. Well, we are headed to our next masterclass here in about a half an hour or so, but we can all give our lovely lecturer a round of applause. Thank you so much. You
And
are
thank you guys.
awesome. Well done. And we try at least to have some book clubs every month. It's been harder the with the quarantine, but we definitely want to keep that going here. So if anybody is interested in doing that sort of thing, definitely let us have or you can give us that information that you would be interested, and we can definitely include you in that invitation. So anyway, Rachel is one of those lovely book club members. She's kind of our head gal there. So if you enjoy,
Prima book club.
yes, that would be a good spot to continue, being able to
Yes.
have kinds of intense conversations and open our minds. So with that, I will say good night. No, just kidding. We're still going, guys.
I'll see you guys all at the masterclass in half an hour.
All right, everybody. Thank you again for joining. Have a good one. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.